As usual, you always want to have a movie render queue and then the additional render passes, just so for smooth animations, and then the HDR backdrop. That's usually like the main three plugins for just building anything in Unreal Engine. So we're gonna start by bringing in our sign camera as usual. So window, place actors, then we're gonna type in sign, and just drag it into the map. The next thing we're gonna do is add some post-process volume. Same thing. I already have mine kind of like dragged in here. But the post-process volume is gonna help us kind of like adjust colors and exposure and things like that. I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth through all the settings here. And that's kind of all we need from the place actor. And then the rest will be just Quixel bridge as usual. I have a lot of the settings already preloaded to save time. I like starting with this gate. So you can always click from W to R, and it'll allow you to like swap from movement to rescaling. I just want to resize this bad boy a little bit. Drop him right here. Then I want to go into my sign camera and my outliner on the right. Well, what I want to do, actually, camera is not facing the door, which is okay. We can position it better. Just a little bit. Whoops. Alright. Once you have the sign camera selected, we're gonna go to the details below here. And what I want to do, I want to go to the focus settings, and for focus mode to tracking, and just to kind of have this set up now before we go more in depth. So we're gonna select the old tomb, then just to double click it. Now the camera, when we're going to be doing animations later, is going to be kind of focusing on the door, but we're just going to have it set up now, so we don't have to kind of worry about later once we have everything kind of like in our face. So that's step 2. And then I enjoyed DCLR just because it's more zoomed out. That's kind of it. Lower this a bit. Alright. So all the assets, as usual, will be in your local file. And I'm using one preset, which is just the Japanese shrine. And everything is kind of the same, using the same textures and lighting. So even if you kind of combine them and fuse the textures a little bit together, they mesh quite well. Just because they're made from the same pack, so you don't really have to do much resizing. That's always nice. Alright, so I'm gonna create a simple gate, something like a tunnel. Not really building the whole atmosphere like in the last lesson, just more of a personal squeezed in shot. I think that's gonna be the goal for this. Right. Let me see. Okay. Do you like how everything is aligned? I'm gonna adjust this a bit closer. Okay. I think we could resize this bigger though. There we go. Now we're gonna duplicate this rock to the right. When you're building a lot of scenes, especially just like setting the world before we start adding any textures or foliage, it's always a process because you're just trying to align everything. So some things will be short, but some things will take time, even just to adjust very like small items, just so it looks presentable. But so far, I think it doesn't look too bad. So I think I used only like 7 elements to build the whole scene, and then the rest was mostly just foliage. So the way I build is like I try to get to the world first, so just building the landscape, and then once I'm finished with the landscape, I go into just adding the details, textures, atmosphere, and lighting. And I think that's like a very easy process to follow. Build world and then start decorating it a bit. Kind of just want this to be like a background element. All right. So far, so good. I want to see how the shot looks through the camera. Position it close. Alright, so now I want to fill more of this. I'm going to duplicate and pull it out, but just to make sure the transition is nice, I'm going to mirror it on its x-axis. And I'm going to position the patterns together like this. It just looks like continuation of that. Using the same idea with the rocks, I'm just going to pull them to add more of like a geometry to the depth. Same over here. And I think we're almost at the 50% mark. Just landscape wise. Alright. I like the shot so far. Now we can start filling it a bit. So as you can notice right now, when you're building anything, we're always in selection mode. And allows us to edit, resize. But once we're going into foliage mode, we can't really do any of like placing or resizing. So from selection to foliage. And then we can kind of resize this a bit. Yep, we want to be always in the paint category. There's other things you can do, like for single drop, so you can fill. You can also use it in reverse to kind of like erase any of the textures you put or any of the foliage. But we're just going to be on paint, and then we're going to go to the options. So brush size is pretty simple. Let me select plant over here. So you can see it's a 10, and then if I place this guy over here, kind of like that. So if I have the slope and I kind of spam it, quite nice, but we can also increase it to 100. That will allow us to decorate the wall. But as you can see, if I'm like spamming on the wall, not everything is actually spawning. Instead of like if I did it on the ground, it's more accurate. And that's because naturally all the brush settings, especially on any plant that you pick, or if you import any to your own, the slope is always going to be 45 degrees, which means the angle that you're placing the foliage or the flower is going to use a 45-degree angle. So if you put it to 180, it changes the whole radius, and now you can actually start kind of placing it everywhere without an issue. Yeah. And if you want to increase the speed of it, I think 25 for the brush size is usually a really decent speed in terms of just like spamming it. And then you can do also multi-selection, which is nice. So you can left click and actually start selecting multiple of the plants. But to make sure all of them are connected to the same slope, just make sure they're highlighted in the blue box. And then the settings would reset on the bottom, but we can readjust it. I do not see it. There we go. And now we're placing more of the plants at the same time. But this process does take time because we have to fill in the cracks and kind of just try to do everything by hand. But usually when you are building a game or any scene, everything you kind of do see was placed manually. So even the most simplistic scenes, just like decorating this wall, could take 10-15 minutes, but that's okay. Density at 1, foliage 2. Alright, and now we can kind of just drop it quicker, which is nice. The goal is to kind of fill in the cracks, to hide any of the separating and clipping of the environment, and to try and put as much foliage as you can within the geometry, so it looks kind of like natural, growing slowly through the rocks. Now I'm going to try and fill in the empty gaps with different plants just to kind of speed up the process as well. There you go. When you do select multiple plants on the same pixel where you're clicking, it will generate all the selected plants, and then using kind of like the placement, it will position them all quite nicely. So you can either spam click really quickly or just hold left click, and you can see like they slowly start appearing wherever your mouse is kind of like going, highlighting. The more quality of the foliage, the longer it will kind of like take you to load. But if you're just building it on the lowest quality, you can kind of span kind of quickly, I would say. But the process is slightly tedious. See if I can. Doing 20 would be better. It's a big rock. Alright. I think we got as much as we could. But you would have to do the same process on the other side. But that would take too much time, so I think we're just gonna start duplicating our parts. And since the environment is kind of placed how we like it, it will not take us too long. Alright. Well, I think we did a pretty good job. Alright. So we want to go back into selection mode. And just to save time, I'm going to duplicate the wall with the added texture. Let's just delete this guy. As we can see, most of the flowers are here. We will have to add just a tiny bit more, but I think usually 80 to 90% is transferred, which is quite nice. I'm just gonna adjust everything slowly back to its original position. Right. Fully. Two. I guess if there's like any questions, we could also do them in the middle of the lesson, because it's more kind of just like set up this one than the other one. So if there are questions, let me know. But so far, we're just trying to add as much foliage into the geometry as we can.
Yeah, so far no questions. But if you have questions, guys, feel free to ask them in the chat.
Yeah. Like the process is very tedious because you're just trying to make every corner look pretty. And the bigger, for example, the map we're doing, because we're doing a massive tunnel, it'll take just longer to do. But But you would use the same principle if you're building, let's say, a jungle or a forest or any type of scenery. And once you have your environment, you would just manually, by hand, with the brush, start placing everything. And the bigger the world, the more foliage you'll need. Okay. I think it's also a little bit too bright. See. Not too dark. Alright. I'm gonna go and drag them up. I already made like a pre-made blend just to save time so I don't have to place the flowers. But I will go more in depth into the flowers. Any of the content that you do use will be in your mega scans, for example. And then anything you're adding through the content folder over here will drop into here. So let's say we're going into our 3D plants and we're using two textures, either like the beach plants or we're using the poppy seeds. You will have everything here, but usually everything is already capped at a certain like pixel rate. But just like I think I did in the last one, if you actually click nanite, it will refresh every pixel and just kind of like triple to quadruple the very quality of them, making them just look as realistic as possible. And you can do the same if you actually go back to content, mega scans, 3D plants, and the same thing, for example, on the wall. So you could increase the foliage and make them look as realistic as you want just by right clicking and then using the AI that's built within Unreal Engine to enhance it. So, but I had everything preset. Gave us some time. Alright, that's better. I feel like I should have done that with the rocks and just showcased a tiny bit of it, but it's okay.
Trial and error.
But yeah, so you could do one rock, for example, spam it completely, and then just duplicate it, and then you could have, I guess in theory, just 4 big rocks fully covered with the foliage. I'm gonna delete this. Not what I want to do. There we go. There. There we go. So now we have all the flowers that we want. I feel like we could have added more foliage to the rock, but it's okay. So we can go into the process volume right now. And it's the big box that we kind of like put before we established the scene. And we can kind of just play around. But we want to go to a very specific area, which would be anything from the advance to the size is not very necessary, or the bloom. What we want though it actually did. Making sure that temperature and everything is already turned down and balanced. And then once you have that, you can actually select and then kind of play with the area. But I don't think it's adjusting. Where's the pros? Okay, there it is. Drop it here. Alright. Now it should work. There we go. So if we made the box bigger, you can see like right here, nothing is actually changed. But if we go into the box, everything here has changed, and then from the box. So we would make the box bigger to match the actual sign of the actor. And then the whole scene of the camera going through would be this. But I guess I should have made it bigger in the beginning. And then just with the left click or manually, you can actually start adjusting, you know, how you want this. But I think I just want a little bit more of a contrast and saturation. Tiny bit. I like that. And I think just to see how it would look. Alright. So I feel like more foliage could have been added here, but everything else looks quite decent. So I'm quite happy with it. So you could play with all the settings here, like the gamma, the grain, and the offset. And the bigger the actual post volume box, the more things you can edit and change. You can adjust the size of it, and you can put the camera in, and you can do like an animation. And you can also place different post-process boxes. So if the camera is going through different slopes, you can have different lighting effects happening, or just one lighting effect. And to do the animation, it's always the same. Right click, new folder. And then within the folder, we want to add cinematics, a level sequence. And then dragging the camera into our level sequence. And we can start kind of playing with the camera to see just where we want it. Oh, apologies, I misclicked. That looks pretty decent. So as you recall, we put the tracking on the camera to focus. So when it's zooming in through all the foliage and all the flowers, they will render automatically. You can actually see that when we're actually entering the post-process box, the lighting shifts quite dramatically. So if we multiply the box to put the whole scene, then the whole scene would be this bright, or we could put, like I said, different areas for different lighting effects. But the whole camera and zoom will always be focused on the actual door, and everything else around it would be kind of pixelated. Well, not pixelated, but not as focused, because the whole focus point is this door, making sure it looks as rendered as possible, and then everything else will kind of just blend naturally. But you can adjust in the sign settings, of course, the focus to anything else. So let's say we had a beast here dancing, then you would focus on the beast, and as the camera is like zooming in or shaking, for example, or doing a rotation, it will just continue focusing on whatever object you have in the middle of it. I think that's mostly everything I have, unless there's some questions for me to go like more in depth. But this was mostly just on the brush, the slope, and then on the placement. And then in order to save time, as everything has to be done manually or by hand, you can do one object and kind of just duplicate it to set up a whole scene.